Think about the last truly great idea you had. Maybe it came to you in the shower, maybe it was halfway through a conversation, or while reading something unrelated, or in that strange drifting state just before sleep. It felt important. You told yourself you would remember it, write it down later, do something with it. Did you? For most of us, the honest answer is no. The idea evaporated. It joined the enormous, invisible graveyard of insights, half-formed thoughts, brilliant connections, and useful facts that our minds generate constantly and then quietly discard, not because they were not valuable, but because we never built something to catch them. Tiago Forte believes this is one of the great hidden tragedies of modern life. We live in an age of more information than any humans in history have ever had access to. We read more, we listen to more, we're exposed to more ideas in a single week than our grandparents encountered in years, and yet most of us feel less capable of using any of it, overwhelmed rather than empowered, drowning rather than enriched. His answer is a system he calls the second brain, a method for capturing, organizing, and ultimately using the best ideas you ever encounter so that nothing valuable is ever lost again, and so that your own thinking, rather than being buried under an avalanche of input, finally has room to do what it does best: imagine, connect, and create. Today, we're walking through that entire system, what a second brain actually is, the four-step method for building one, and how it transforms not just how you take notes, but how you think, create, and finish meaningful work. Let's begin.
Let's start with the basic idea, because it is more radical than it first sounds. Forte describes a second brain as something like the world's best personal assistant, one that combines the functions of a study notebook, a personal journal, and a sketchbook for new ideas, all adapted to your specific evolving needs over time. Your second brain is always on, has perfect memory, and can scale to any size. The more you outsource and delegate the jobs of capturing, organizing, and distilling to technology, the more time and energy you'll have available for the self-expression that only you can do. That last phrase is the key to the entire philosophy. This is not about turning yourself into a more efficient filing cabinet. It is about freeing your biological brain, your actual, limited, easily overwhelmed brain, from jobs it was never well suited for in the first place, so it can focus on the jobs only it can do: original thought, creative connection, judgment, and meaning-making. This idea is not new, even if the technology is. Forte points out that thinkers throughout history have kept some version of an external knowledge system, what used to be called a commonplace book, or what the German sociologist Niklas Luhmann famously called his Zettelkasten, his slip box, a system of cross-referenced index cards that he credited with an astonishingly prolific career. The American inventor Vannevar Bush dreamed of something similar decades before personal computers existed, a device he called the Memex. The names change. The underlying impulse to build something outside your skull that remembers what your skull cannot and that helps you think better than you could alone is ancient. What has changed is that this is now available to anyone with a smartphone, not just scholars with elaborate card catalogues. So, what does a second brain, properly built, actually let you do? Forte lists several concrete capabilities. You can find anything you have learned, touched, or thought about in the past within seconds. You can organize your knowledge so it actively moves your projects forward rather than sitting inert. You can save your best thinking so you're never forced to reinvent it from scratch. You can notice connections between ideas across completely different areas of your life, patterns you would otherwise miss because the relevant pieces are scattered across different books, different conversations, different years. You can share your work with more confidence because you're not pulling ideas out of thin air under pressure. You're drawing on a deep reservoir you've been quietly filling for a long time. And critically, you can actually switch off and relax because you trust the system to hold the details so your mind doesn't have to. That last point deserves emphasis. A huge amount of background mental strain comes not from doing too much, but from trying to remember too much, holding open loops, half-formed tasks, and scattered facts in your head, because you don't trust any external system to hold them reliably. A working second brain closes those loops. It gives your mind permission to stop running quiet background processes that were never meant to run all day. Forte also identifies 3 stages most people pass through as their second brain matures. At first, it functions mainly as a memory aid, a place to park facts and ideas you would otherwise forget, meeting notes, useful quotes, project details. Over time, it becomes a thinking tool, a place where you start to connect ideas to each other rather than just storing them in isolation. And eventually, for those who stick with it, it becomes a creation engine, a place with so much accumulated raw material that you finally have the confidence to turn your knowledge into something concrete and shareable with the world. Before getting into the practical method, Forte wants you to understand why this works, what specifically a well-built second brain does for your thinking that your unaided memory cannot. He calls these the 4 superpowers. The first superpower is making our ideas concrete. Thoughts in your head are supery, vague, difficult to examine, rearrange, or build upon while they remain purely mental. The moment you write something down, even imperfectly, it becomes an object, something you can look at, edit, move around, combine with other objects. Before we do anything with our ideas, we have to offload them from our minds and put them into concrete form. Only when we declutter our brain of complex ideas can we think clearly and start to work with those ideas effectively. This is why writing often clarifies thinking more than thinking alone ever could. The page, or the screen, becomes a kind of workbench, somewhere your ideas can sit still long enough for you to actually examine them. The second superpower is revealing new associations between ideas. Forte argues that creativity, stripped of its mystique, is mostly the act of connecting things that do not obviously belong together. The more diverse material you have in one place, quotes, images, half-formed thoughts, facts from completely unrelated fields, the more likely you are to notice an unexpected bridge between them. By keeping diverse kinds of material in one place, we facilitate this connectivity and increase the likelihood that we'll notice an unusual association. This is something a scattered, ungathered mind simply cannot do as well. If your best insight about marketing is buried in a notebook from 3 years ago, and your best insight about psychology is sitting unread in a different app entirely, they'll never meet. A second brain puts them in the same room. The third superpower is incubating ideas over time. We are all, Forte notes, subject to recency bias. We tend to favor whatever idea occurred to us most recently, regardless of whether it's actually the best one available to us. Our unaided memory privileges the present moment because that's simply how working memory functions. It cannot hold years of accumulated thinking in active view at once. A second brain changes this completely. It lets you draw on insights from months or years ago with the same ease as something you thought of this morning. Forte calls this the slow burn approach to creativity, letting ideas simmer over long stretches of time rather than relying on bursts of manic last-minute effort. Having a second brain where lots of ideas can be permanently saved for the long term turns the passage of time into your friend instead of your enemy. The fourth superpower is sharpening our unique perspective. This is perhaps the most encouraging of the 4, especially for anyone who has ever felt creatively stuck. Forte argues that creative block is rarely a sign that something is wrong with you. It's usually a sign that you simply do not yet have enough raw material to work with. If it feels like the well of inspiration has run dry, it's because you need a deeper well full of examples, illustrations, stories, statistics, diagrams, analogies, metaphors, photos, mind maps, conversation notes, quotes, anything that will help you argue for your perspective or fight for a cause you believe in. With the why established, Forte gives us the how, a 4-step method he calls CODE: capture, organize, distill, express. We will take each step in turn, starting with capture. The first instinct most people have when they discover note-taking systems is to try to save everything, every interesting sentence, every useful fact, every passing thought. Forte argues this is exactly the wrong approach, and it is usually what causes people to abandon their systems within weeks. Our goal should be to capture only the ideas and insights we think are truly noteworthy. The key shift Forte asks you to make is what he calls adopting a curator's perspective. Think of yourself not as a passive recipient of information, drowning in whatever happens to flow past you, but as an active editor, the judge, interpreter, and gatekeeper of what gets to enter your personal knowledge collection. The best curators are picky about what they allow into their collections, and you should be too. So how do you decide what is worth capturing? Forte's guidance is refreshingly intuitive rather than analytical. You are looking for resonance, a feeling, not a calculation. The ideas worth keeping are usually the ones that surprise you a little, the unusual ones, the counterintuitive ones, the ones that make you pause, even if you cannot immediately explain why. When something resonates, it moves you on an intuitive level. What kinds of things should actually go into your second brain? Forte divides them into 2 broad categories. External knowledge assets are things that come from outside you, highlights from books, memorable quotes from podcasts or audiobooks, bookmarks of interesting articles, voice memos recorded as notes to yourself, notes from meetings and phone calls, inspiring images, and key takeaways from courses or conferences. And internal knowledge assets are things that originate from inside you, your favorite stories and anecdotes, the small and large insights you arrive at through your own thinking, memories from your life you don't want to lose, personal reflections written in a journal, and the random, half-formed musings that strike you in the shower or on a walk. And here's a practical rule of thumb that prevents the most common failure mode of digital note-taking, capturing so much raw material that it becomes useless. Forte suggests capturing no more than around 10% of any original source. If you're reading a book, that means a small handful of genuinely striking passages, not page after page of highlights. Save too much, and your future self will face exactly the same overwhelming wall of text you were originally trying to escape, just relocated into a different app. Capturing without organizing simply creates a different kind of clutter, a digital pile instead of a physical one. So the second step is organize, and here Forte introduces what may be the single most influential idea in the entire book, a system he calls PARA. Before explaining PARA specifically, Forte makes an important philosophical point about organization in general. Most people, instinctively, try to organize their notes by topic, folders for psychology, business, health, and so on, mirroring the categories you might have used in a school library. Forte argues this is a mistake because topic-based organization tells you nothing about whether a piece of information is actually useful to you right now. Instead, he recommends organizing for action. The best way to organize your notes is to organize for action according to the active projects you are working on right now. Consider new information in terms of its utility, asking, how is this going to help me move forward one of my current projects? This single shift, Forte argues, radically simplifies the entire problem of information overload. Most of the content flowing past you at any given moment is not relevant to anything you are actively doing. Once you start filtering for actionability rather than topic, the amount of material you actually need to organize carefully shrinks dramatically.
PARA stands for Projects, Areas, Resources, and Archives, 4 categories arranged from most actionable to least. Projects are short-term efforts with a defined beginning, a defined end, and a specific outcome that marks completion. Things you could describe with a verb like finalize, launch, or publish. A note that belongs to an active project is something you will see again the next time you sit down to work on that project. Areas are longer-term responsibilities you want to maintain over time, without a specific finish line. Things like your health, your finances, your key relationships. There is no done state for these. Instead, there is a standard you want to uphold. For health, the standard might be exercising a certain number of times per week. For finances, it might be always paying bills on time. Resources are topics of ongoing interest that are not currently tied to an active project or area. Things you're curious about, trends you're following, ideas related to your field that you're not yet acting on. Forte compares these to the subject notebooks you might have kept in school, one for biology, one for history, gathered for future reference rather than immediate use. Archives hold everything from the other 3 categories that has gone inactive: completed projects, areas you're no longer maintaining, resources you've lost interest in. Nothing in archives is deleted. It's simply moved out of your active workspace, safely preserved in case you ever need it again, without cluttering the space where you actually do your daily work. By placing a folder in cold storage, it doesn't clutter your workspace, while safekeeping it forever just in case you need it. What makes PARA so powerful, in Forte's view, is that this same 4-category structure works across every digital tool you use: your Notes app, your cloud storage, your task manager, your email, creating a consistent organizational logic across your entire digital life, rather than a different ad hoc system in every app.
Capturing and organizing solve the problem of losing information, but they create a new problem. Even well-organized notes can pile up into an overwhelming wall of text that is technically saved, but practically unusable. This is where the 3rd step, distill, becomes essential. Forte's central concept here is discoverability, not just whether information exists somewhere in your system, but how easily you can find and actually use the specific, useful part of it when you need it. Discoverability is an idea from information science that refers to the degree to which a piece of content or information can be found in a file, database, or other information system. To improve discoverability, Forte revives a habit most of us learned in school and then largely abandoned: highlighting. But he develops it into a more sophisticated technique he calls progressive summarization, distilling a note down through several layers, each one more condensed than the last. Layer 1 is the raw material, the original excerpts you save from a source, copied directly with minimal editing. Forte calls this the soil, the ground on which everything else will be built. Critically, you are not saving the entire source. You captured only the 10% or so that genuinely resonated back in the capture stage. Layer 2 is created by going back through those excerpts later and bolding the most important phrases and sentences within them. Forte calls this striking oil. The instruction here is important. Do not approach this analytically, trying to calculate logically which parts are most important. Instead, read intuitively and bold whatever creates a feeling of resonance as you encounter it again. Layer 3 goes further still. You read through only the bolded passages from Layer 2, and from those you highlight or underline, if your app lacks highlighting, only the very best of the best. Forte calls this layer gold, and he is emphatic that you should be extremely picky here. An entire note might end up with only 1 or 2 highlighted sentences. That is not a failure, that is the point. A note distilled down to 1 resonant sentence is far more useful to your future self than a note containing 3 unread paragraphs.
Layer 4, used only rarely for the small number of sources that prove truly exceptional, involves adding a short executive summary in your own words at the top of the note. Forte suggests you'll know a note deserves this fourth layer when you find yourself returning to it again and again, a clear sign it has become one of the genuine cornerstones of your thinking. A useful rule of thumb governs the whole process. Each layer should distill down roughly 10 to 20% of the layer before it. If your initial excerpts from a book total 500 words, your bolded layer should land somewhere around 100 words, and your highlighted layer at perhaps 20 words or fewer, a sentence, maybe two, capturing the essence of everything that came before. The beauty of progressive summarization is that it doesn't require you to do all this distillation in one sitting immediately after capturing something. You do it gradually, over repeated encounters with your own notes, adding a layer here, a layer there, whenever you happen to revisit a note for some other reason. Over time, your most valuable notes naturally become your most distilled ones, simply through the accumulated friction of returning to them.
All of this, capturing, organizing, distilling, exists in service of one final purpose. Forte is blunt about this. What is the point of knowledge if it doesn't help anyone or produce anything? The fourth and final step, express, is where your second brain stops being a private archive and starts becoming the engine behind actual, finished, shared work. The key concept here is what Forte calls intermediate packets. Small, reusable, concrete units of work in progress that you create once and can then draw on again and again across multiple future projects. Intermediate packets are the concrete individual building blocks that make up your work. He notes with evident delight that the abbreviation IP is fitting in more ways than one. These genuinely are your intellectual property. You created them. You own them, and, critically, you have the right to reuse them indefinitely in any future project, rather than rebuilding similar work from scratch every single time. Reusing intermediate packets of work frees up our attention for higher order, more creative thinking. Thinking small is the best way to elevate your horizons and expand your ambitions. Forte identifies 5 kinds of intermediate packets worth deliberately saving. Distilled notes, books or articles you have processed with progressive summarization, ready to be referenced quickly. Outtakes, material that did not make it into a past project but might be perfect for a future one. Work in process, documents, agendas, outlines, and plans you produced while working on something, even if that something never fully shipped. Final deliverables, completed pieces of work that could become components of something larger down the line, and documents created by others, useful material from colleagues, clients, or collaborators that you have permission to reference and build on. The practical effect of thinking in intermediate packets is enormous. Instead of facing every new project as a blank page, demanding you generate everything from nothing under time pressure, you face it as an assembly process, pulling together pieces you have already created, distilled, and refined, and combining them in a new configuration for the task at hand. Forte also addresses a practical question every system eventually has to answer. How do you actually find what you're looking for once your second brain has grown large? He offers 4 retrieval methods used in combination. Search is the most direct, useful when you already know roughly what you're looking for and can describe it in words. Browsing, manually navigating through your parafolders, works well when you want the contextual clues that come from seeing related material nearby, gradually narrowing from general to specific. Tags let you cut across your folder structure entirely, surfacing notes that share a theme even when they live in completely different projects or areas, helping you spot cross-disciplinary patterns that rigid folders would otherwise hide. And the fourth method, serendipity, is the most interesting. Forte encourages keeping your searches a little broader than strictly necessary, glancing through adjacent folders rather than going straight to the exact match.
He also points out that visual material, images in particular, activates a different, faster, more intuitive part of the brain than text, which is part of why he recommends saving images alongside your written notes whenever possible. And, perhaps most importantly, sharing your half-formed ideas with other people introduces an element of serendipity no solo system can replicate. Their reactions, often unpredictable, frequently reveal something about your own thinking that you couldn't have seen alone.
We have now covered the full code method, but Forte closes the book with something more conceptual, an explanation of why this particular four-step structure works so well for actually producing finished, creative work, rather than just accumulating tidy notes forever. He draws on a pattern he says shows up in essentially every creative process across every domain, the alternation between divergence and convergence. A creative endeavor begins with an act of divergence. You open the space of possibilities and consider as many options as possible. The purpose of divergence is to generate new ideas, so the process is necessarily spontaneous, chaotic, and messy. Divergence is expansive. It is the part of creative work where you are gathering, reading widely, capturing freely, following tangents, collecting more raw material than you will ultimately use. It should feel a little chaotic because that chaos is doing real work, increasing the surface area for unexpected connections. But divergence alone never produces a finished anything. At some point, you must shift into the opposite mode. Convergence forces us to eliminate options, make trade-offs, and decide what is truly essential. It is about narrowing the range of possibilities so that you can make forward progress and end up with a final result you are proud of. Forte maps this pattern directly onto the code method. Capture and organize are fundamentally acts of divergence, gathering seeds of imagination from wherever they appear and storing them somewhere safe without yet forcing them into any particular shape. Distill and express are acts of convergence, closing the door to new input and instead building something concrete and finished out of the material you have already gathered. Innovation and problem-solving depend on a routine that systematically brings interesting ideas to the surface of our awareness. One of the most useful practical techniques Forte offers for managing this divergence-convergence transition is what he calls the archipelago of ideas. Picture a chain of islands scattered across an ocean, each island a single idea, quote, or point you have gathered that feels relevant to whatever you are trying to create. The technique works by deliberately separating two mental tasks that are difficult to do simultaneously, selecting which ideas matter and sequencing them into a logical order. Selection is divergent, requiring an open state of mind that is willing to consider any possibility. Sequencing is convergent, requiring a more closed state of mind, focused only on the material you have already in front of you. Trying to do both at once, deciding what is good while also deciding what order it goes in, is, Forte argues, one of the main reasons creative work feels so much harder than it needs to be. By first gathering your islands of ideas without worrying at all about their order, and only afterwards switching into a separate mode focused purely on arranging them, you stop forcing your brain to do two fundamentally incompatible jobs at the same time. This is, in many ways, the deepest insight of the entire book. Building a second brain is really not about note-taking software. It's about restructuring how you work so that gathering and creating happen as distinct sequential phases, rather than the anxious, simultaneous scramble most of us default to when facing a blank page with a deadline attached. Building a second brain is really about standardizing the way we work, because we only really improve when we standardize the way we do something.
Tiago Forte opens his book with a striking image. Technology not as a storage medium, but a bicycle for the mind. A tool that once you learn to use it properly, does not replace your thinking, but accelerates it,
carrying you toward your goals far faster than you could ever travel under your own unaided power. That is, ultimately, the promise of the entire system we have walked through today. Not a more elaborate filing cabinet, not a productivity hack for its own sake. A genuine extension of your capacity to think, connect, remember, and create, built deliberately, maintained consistently, and oriented always toward one final purpose, helping you actually finish and share the work that matters to you. The 4 steps are simple enough to hold in your head. Capture what resonates, using a curator's eye rather than trying to save everything. Organize for action using para, sorting by what you are actually doing rather than abstract topic. Distill progressively, so your most valuable notes become more useful, not less, the more times you return to them. And express. Turn the whole accumulated structure outward into intermediate packets you can assemble into real, finished, shared work. None of this happens overnight. Forte is candid that building a genuinely useful second brain is a habit cultivated over months and years, not a weekend project. But the alternative, relying entirely on an unaided biological memory in a world producing more information than any mind could ever hold, is not actually a viable long-term strategy for anyone trying to do meaningful creative or professional work. Like a bicycle for the mind, once we learn how to use it properly, technology can enhance our cognitive abilities and accelerate us toward our goals far faster than we could ever achieve on our own. The next great idea you have, in the shower, in a conversation, in the middle of reading something unrelated, does not have to evaporate. You now have a method for catching it, refining it, and eventually, when the moment is right, turning it into something real. If this summary resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell us, what is the one idea from today you most want to start capturing? We read every one. Until next time, stay blessed and have a great life.